Again, welcome to Module 1 of Social Work 793. This is basically going to be the format of all of our short lectures for the semester. I try to start out the lecture with a brief introduction to what to expect for the module and kind of like my objectives, and then kind of just work through the PowerPoint slides. And as we move through the semester, you'll have different activities that are related to the module discussion. There's going to be a discussion forum, and also some activities that complement the single system design discussion, and you'll find more about this online on the course website. So as we begin, I'd just like to remind you or to encourage you to fill out the short student introduction form so that I can get to know more about you. Also, be sure to review the syllabus and the course website. Again, I would just encourage you to email me with any kind of questions you may have. I'm super responsive to emails, almost kind of obsessive with responding as fast as I can. So please feel free to email me with any kind of questions you may have. If it's about a due date, I would encourage you to check out the syllabus first. But other than that, feel free to email me with any other questions that you may have. So today, I'm just hoping to cover the basic characteristics of single system design, defining single system design and the real nuts and bolts of it. Also discussing the scientific practitioner and NASW code of ethics, advantages of single system design, and steps to evaluating practice. So kind of setting up a roadmap for the rest of the semester so that you kind of know what to expect. And I guess the big question right now is why we're doing this, why we're doing practice evaluation, and why you have a course on single system design. And I would say broadly, there's ethical considerations that we'll cover, practice considerations, and professional issues. But I would say also there's a huge push for it right now within just about every organization because people want to see practice evaluation and they want to know whether they're doing is actually working and whether it's helping their clients. So in order to provide the very best practices that we kind of owe it to both ourselves and our profession, but also to our clients to provide evidence-based practices and the best possible standard of evidence-based interventions that are available to our clients that we serve. So what are single system designs? And in a nutshell, the phrase single system design really refers to any kind of procedure to observe a client's problem, which can be measured repeatedly over time. So it's basically spending some time meeting with a client and conceptually defining a problem, translating into quantifiable terms that we can continually repeat over time and kind of tailor our interventions towards that specific problem. So within single system design, it involves continually observing a client before, during, and sometimes even after an intervention within a maintenance phase. Single system designs involve identification of a client's goals and objectives, as well as his or her potential strength. A lot of times we look at stuff from like a deficit-based model of what the problem is, and we spend a lot of time talking about the problem. But I think it's also important to really spend some good time identifying what the client's strengths are and what their motivations are and where that all lies. So again, single system designs monitor a baseline, which is what would be expected without any type of intervention, and compare that to an intervention phase where we can see if our intervention is really having the intended impact that we would like it to. And finally, single system evaluation determines whether or not the client outcome was actually successful and kind of quantifying that success. So some more basics of single system designs that they involve graphing of an individual client's problem using repeated measures. And then graphing is done to really show what the changes are from the baseline to the intervention phase, and if there's any kind of patterns that may emerge from the data. And changes in the intervention phase can be compared to the baseline phase, so we can really see if there's a statistically significant change, practical significant change, and kind of an overall picture of what's really been going on. So within single system design, the same measurements used to establish the baseline and continually repeatedly used after the baseline is complete and onto the intervention. So you're using the same measure to measure the same outcome variable from the beginning to the end of the intervention and even into the maintenance phase. So let's say, to get more concrete with an example, if we're working with smoking cessation, our measure would be number of cigarettes smoked per day. And you would measure the same thing in the baseline as the intervention and even into the maintenance phase. So that way we know what the changes in patterns and trends are from one phase to the next and what's expected to go on to the maintenance phase. Otherwise, if we're measuring differing variables, we don't really know what the staying power of our intervention is. We can certainly include comments or other factors about that might be related to smoking cessation, but that should be our consistent outcome variable that we continually measure over time. So I think as a scientific practitioner, and what might differentiate you from a bachelor's level or a different form of social worker. As an MSW, you are a scientific practitioner because you're incorporating research into your practice. So a scientific practice occurs when the art and creativity of practice, along with the values and philosophy of practice, are combined with an empirical orientation. An empirical orientation is a way to really test to see if what we're doing is actually having the intended outcome, and if it's having the intended effect for the client that we're serving. And this really fits well with the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. So how does the scientific practice hold up to the Code of Ethics? So if we're looking at justice, dignity of a person, integrity of a person, competence, NASW Code of Ethics is really supported by single system design and really helps us to be accountable professionals and also to be providing the best possible services available. Some of the advantages of single system designs are that they can be built into just about any practice setting, so it doesn't matter what you're doing or where you're doing it. It really doesn't take too much extra time really either, and you can provide more or less objective information and a systematic way of monitoring clients' progress. So oftentimes we might assess whether or not what we're doing is really helpful, or we kind of have a feel for whether or not it's helpful. But through single system design, we can really measure if we're having the intended outcome that we're really hoping for. So in my job working with geriatrics, the social work department at the VA is really focused on measuring outcomes of practice. And one of the things that we really look at repeatedly is patients' mood using a PHQ. So if we see somebody is screen positive on a PHQ, we would present it at our baseline when we first meet with them, and then further down the road, review that PHQ to see if their mood is improving or kind of stabilizing. And if it's not stabilizing, maybe we need to get psychiatry or a different profession involved. But that repeated measure helps us to see if there's any kind of warning signs or red flags, and ultimately what we need to do to adopt from there to improve quality of life. And the feedback we get from single system design helps us to determine if our intervention is effective. And it's also easy to use and understand, and it can be presented on to the next clinician. If there was somebody new starting, or if you ever had to change positions, somebody else should be able to see your data and what you've been doing and kind of pick up where you left off. So some basic steps to evaluating practice is to identify the client, who ultimately identifies their own goal. And for your project, you're going to be spending some time either working on a goal that you'd like to address, or somebody that you're working with, or a classmate, etc. Then you are going to select intermediate objectives along the way, identifying evidence-based practices that are going to help get you to your targets from literature, different databases that are out there. And then once you've got your goals and what your intervention is going to be, ultimately collecting data. And once you've collected that data, plotting and graphing that data, ultimately leading to some form of analysis. So to break it down a little bit further, setting up goals and objectives. The helping professional seeks to help the client attain their general goals with long-term desired outcomes and objectives along the way. So these can be viewed as like intermediate goals. Step 2 is setting up targets, which would be a specific objective given an operationally defined problem, so that both the client and the professional can help know the status of an objective at any given time. And so once we've collected some data, we can see if there's any kind of patterns that may emerge, and if we're kind of getting towards our targeted objectives, and seeing if there is any kind of change from the baseline to the intervention phase, and being able to describe that and being able to present it back to the client. And in the latter steps, we'll construct clear benchmarks for success, engage the client in assessment goals, introduce a maintenance phase, and analyze the results of our single system design. So later on, I'll talk about a maintenance phase, which is kind of what we would do after our intervention is completed. But during a maintenance phase, it's still important to try to continue to collect ongoing data. As we move on throughout the semester, I'll discuss these a little bit more in depth, but just good to keep in mind that even once you're done with completing a single system design, we're still going to be leaving our clients with some practice tools to continue to use in their life. And kind of one of the last steps of the semester is analyzing your data. And so I'm going to be spending a good amount of time talking about different types of significance, what our data means, and how to write it up. And so I assure you that despite a lot of people being concerned about the quantitative or statistical component of this course, I'm going to try to make it as painless and hopefully as informative and exciting and interesting as I possibly can. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to email me, and I'll do my best to try to answer all your questions as timely as I possibly can. My goal for the online course is to be just as accessible as any other professor. So feel free to email me or call if you need to, and I'll try to be here to help you along the way.